A very good afternoon to everybody. And what we'll do is that we'll start 1 minute past the hour because I know that people always and often actually have a 2 o'clock hard stop. They need to get their prep sandwich down them before procedures kick in. So we'll start 1 minute past the hour. But if you do want to pose a question to our panelists, you can be the first ones in there. And you can do that in two ways. First of all, actually, through the single speech bubble, which is denoted by the word, guess what? It's called chat. Yeah, just put that in there. You can pose a question. Alternatively, if you want to keep your details anonymous and because you're in witness protection, you can actually put your question in the double speech bubble and tick anonymous, and you can pose your question on the issues that we'll be covering off in this webinar. And through that access, we won't be allowing people to unmute their microphones, so we encourage you to participate through this webinar by posing your comments and your questions through the chat, and as I said, through the Q&A offering there. Right, let's see. Okay, let's wait a few seconds longer there. Audience, Ben from Elephants Don't Forget was just telling me that this is his second webinar of the day. It brings me back to the COVID times. Yeah, it was back-to-back webinars thereafter. So he has exercised vocal cords and strengthened those. And that was the warm-up act this morning. Now this is the encore.
Perhaps a sore throat, Philip.
So yes, nothing like Benlin or Lemsip to actually make sure that the vocal cords are exercised there. We'll wait. We'll get started actually because I think that time is precious there. So welcome indeed to this webinar, Elephants Don't Forget, in association with HuddleCX there. Now we often talk, don't we, about happy employees and happy customers as if they were separate ideas, and in reality the best outcomes when organizations look at experience end to end is how people inside the business and how customers experience it outside the business. And that's why combining on this webinar CX and EX is really about that, and that's exactly what we're covering off in today's session, which is titled CX and EX, the new leadership equation in the age of AI. What a title that is. And thankfully, to unpack that with us, we've got a great panel with us today. Natalie Calvert, founder of HuddleCX, and then Nicola Copcutt, head of UK contact center at Direct Line Group, and of course erstwhile Ben Scales, racking up the webinar features and presentation numbers, who's head of sales at Elephants Don't Forget as well. This is our panelists, and we'll be guiding you through a number of the bullet points that will be covering off through each of the different lenses that they bring to the party throughout this webinar there. Just a domestic side of things, yes, please do. We welcome all encouragement and participation through our polls. We've got a series of polls that we'd love to gauge your opinions on. We'll also send you the presentation afterwards. That'll be a PDF version of the slides alongside a recording. And at any point, just put your hand up and post your question in the chat, or actually tick the anonymous button and pose a question to Natalie, Nicola, and Ben. And you get the opportunity at the end of the webinar to sign up to Natalie's thought leadership, as well as Elephants Don't Forget's leadership on this critical topic area. And we're going to be covering off in a bit more detail these 4 bullet points here. We won't actually unpack what those are. I'm sure you can all read there, but key discussion points here to actually move the conversation forward. But we don't want to just come from a helicopter point of view. We want to make sure that there's some key practical steps which all 3 of our panelists are eager to share with you there. First things first, it's important for us to actually get an opportunity and an understanding of where you sit and where you land in terms of where it's impacting and affecting you in your organization. So where do you see the biggest pressure on frontline performance and customer experience right now? So where do you see the biggest pressure on frontline performance and customer experience now? So single choice opportunity to answer those questions. And whilst you do that, it'd be great just to get, if I can kickstart off with you, Natalie, if I may, on there. If you had to name perhaps one area of where frontline pressure is quietly increasing, but not always visible, what would it be?
So that key word you've got there is quietly increasing, I think. So it's like the silent killer in the background, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's about something that I term as decision load. And that's the load of decisions that we are giving, the weight of those decisions to our frontline teams. So that's around judgment, emotional complexity, and also how they're managed day to day. And that, when I've got a whole team in front of me and I'm the leader of that team, hits me really hard. So my decision load as a leader becomes even heavier. So that really impacts how we deal with customers and how we interact together as well as a team. And when we get it right, that decision load means that for my organization, I'm better at judging things, I minimize risk, I reduce failure, right, which is a really expensive thing, but also I do better things for customers. When I get it wrong, we'll discuss it later on, I'm sure, but there's like a 2.5 million black hole that's going on there within larger organizations. And that's what we start to really expose. So for me, that silent killer at the moment is decision load, really affecting the front line and how it's operating.
I love that. You're going to hear a few mic drop moments in this webinar where we're going to land some really cool key concepts with you. And certainly you're going to add to your Wikipedia dictionaries of key concepts with phrases like decision load. I like that. Nicola, how about you?
Well, I would absolutely agree with what Natalie said. And I think the biggest pressure is just how complicated the work has become. Customers are coming to us after trying self-service or switching channels. So by the time they reach an agent, they're already frustrated. And I guess the issue is more complex. And, that does mean that the emotional load is higher, the judgment that's needed is higher, and all of that is happening whilst service expectations, KPIs are tightening. So it's not really about volume anymore. It's really about the weight of the interaction.
Ben, we've got our poll results coming in there. So our lead answer, 44%, frontline teams handling more complex emotional customer issues. Their tops our leaderboard there. 27% role changing faster than people can build confidence or capability. It doesn't really surprise you there. But yeah, any thoughts of does that resonate with what you're seeing and understanding from your work with contact centers?
100%. I think that my answer to your quiet sort of challenge that's appearing is people having less opportunity, or advisors having less opportunities, kind of take stock and breathe and deal with perhaps some of those more simpler, easier interactions, which just ties in perfectly to the point which the audience is deeming the hardest about interactions being more complex, emotionally charged, and more difficult conversations to have with their customers. So no, I'm not surprised by that one at all, leading the charge.
Would you expect the third 15%, Nicola, managers struggling to support, coach, and retain their teams be a slightly higher percentage than we've seen at 15% recorded there?
I would, because I do think it is more difficult. In a world of so much change, so much complexity, and then obviously it does become more challenging to do that from a time perspective as well. With the change, that absolutely drives pressure on managers, and also when it comes to retaining teams, I think that it is a very different role now. The expectation of frontline agents, and that's not for everyone. So it's really about enabling people, empowering them, coaching and supporting them. All of that takes time and it takes skill.
Natalie, before we move on to our next poll, any comments or observations that you see from these results? Probably resonates with your research and obviously your experiences working with frontline teams.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what Nicola and Ben have just said. I think those three top ones there are totally interrelated. Because the managers are struggling, the teams can't handle more complex, more emotive telephone calls because they're not being coached and supported to do it. If we can stop the managers from struggling and doing more of that, teams will become more capable, more competent, and do a better job. and managers' jobs will get easier. We did some work recently, and shockingly, 20% of a manager's time is spent managing the team. So the other 80% is spent doing internal stuff, sorting out other problems, etc., attending meetings and sitting there saying, why am I here? So if we can get more of a manager's time doing the things we want the managers to do, we'll be in a much better state. But we've got to make sure it's competent and that managers are well supported to do the right thing and the thing that will actually change it for the front line. Because the middle one there, those roles changing faster than people can build confidence, is this kind of fast bullet train heading everybody at the same time. So keeping that really steady is really important. Again, the role of the manager.
NASA, out of interest, the 20% of the manager's time spent managing their team, does that include coaching, training, development activities, or is that extra?
Extra. That's just literally managing the day-to-day work that they're doing. I think it's about 30% off the top of my head of a manager's time is spent resolving issues that the frontline can't resolve themselves. So the manager has to go and connect with other managers and other people in other departments to resolve. So
Find the answer.
already there, then you've lost 50% of the manager. It's a huge cost to business. What was the recent that, it's costing us billions, something like 7.5 billion a week at the moment in the UK in lost management time. It's huge.
Yeah. Nice segue into, we talked about the pressures. Let's talk about the opportunities and the influences and just drill down that into a bit more detail. So the question on the screen, which is what most influences customer experience outcomes in your organization today? Single choice, so you've got a list of options and there. But I want to just build on the conversation and there, and Natalie, that you started off. And I saw this stat, I'll post it in the chat for you. A survey said that with over 40% of consumers already switching providers due to poor contact center experiences, and another 38% seriously considering leaving as a result of the poor experience. What are organizations still getting wrong in this department? Because we've been at this quite a few years now.
Unlike me to be contentious on something, but I think from what I'm seeing and looking at the whole sector and how we're operating, customer experience, customer is being treated as a service issue within the organization. And it's not anymore. We've moved past that. It's a leadership issue. It's how we manage, how we engage, and how we put in place what we term as leadership infrastructure to manage that. Service is there. It's how we manage it that will make the difference. Because in theory, we're losing volumes of contacts because that's all being automated. But the reality is we're moving up that pyramid. We've gone from just simple kind of respond type calls coming in where we have to go to the next level, which is resolve, and then finally to relationship. So we've got to move our people up that pyramid, right? Yeah. It's not just about service anymore. It's so much deeper. So treating customer experience as a leadership infrastructure issue, what we do day in, day out, how we manage teams, how we monitor, manage and lead behavior, that will make a huge difference in our mindsets and the outcomes.
I love that shift that you've made there. And, I want to deepen that with 32% of our audience saying a clear joined up focus on both employee and customer experience, Nicola, there. Follow closely behind 29%, the skills and judgment of frontline employees there. I'll get Ben to respond to that. But 32% joined up between CX and EX, obviously, on there. How are you addressing that challenge or in Direct Line?
I think the first thing to acknowledge is that CX and EX are not siloed. They are absolutely, required to work together. I think organisations get it wrong when they're optimising for internal efficiency and not focusing on what is the real customer need. So what we do is, yes, we pour investment into technology, but we also pour it into our people. As I mentioned before, the role is becoming much more challenging, and we want to equip people with the coaching and the support to enable those high intensity moments, the high judgment interactions that remain key to the role.
And yes, high judgment and intensive interactions that you have. And that's why we're leaning definitely onto the second answer at 29%, Ben, which is skills and judgment of frontline employees. Probably segues quite nicely into the question that was posed also in the chat as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, at the end of the day, the frontline employees are the individuals who are facing off to the customer and have got a huge impact on the customer experience. So I'm not surprised that that is so high ranked in the poll. I think it just demonstrates the importance of looking after your managers and looking after your frontline employees. And your frontline employees, really, the first person that they look to be looked after is their manager. So it dovetails neatly into sort of what Natalie was saying. I think it's really interesting that 5 from 38, 13%, the quality of tech, tools, and AI. I think that narrative feels like it's changed over the last couple of years, where AI was top component of how do we maximize our customer experience and do things quickly. Let's automate, let's use tech. Actually, Seesaw is starting to move back towards people again, which I've got to say I'm really pleased by, because I think that's so important. And to your point, Lynette, Lemon's question in the chat around whose responsibility should it be from a training perspective? Should it be a trainer or should it be the manager? I think that's a fair challenge, Lynette. My thoughts are the team leader should certainly be capable of coaching, whether it be training, if not training, certainly coaching, because they are at the coalface holding the hands of the frontline employees and should be really capable and competent coaches.
I would agree with that, Ben. For me, that is the key role of the team leader, is to explore people's capability, to show them, to help them practice. Yeah, I think that is the most important part of the role.
It's interesting we've seen that shift, Natalie, slightly away from technology. And again, your research, in addition with other data and research in 2025 and even this year, suggests that we shouldn't be just talking about technology, and goes back to that point about, which is the highest ranking answer response, it's about management and leadership. And I do, by the way, I do make a difference between management and leadership there. But give us a helicopter or bird's eye view of what's going on in the sector, the pushes and the pull, the constraints and the opportunities here.
Well, I think just looking at the poll results there, just focusing on that just for the second, that when we look at it again, it's a statistical thing, isn't it? 75% of AI implementations are failing. And that's a significant number. And where do they fail? They fail for the customer. More customers are leaving, and they're also failing for the front line. So there has to be clear action where we have to, as organizations, as Nicola said earlier, come out of the silos and start bringing together the forces that bring together employee experience and customer experience, join up IT, join up HR, so that there isn't an IT written customer journey going on. It's actually customer driven. And when we look at the rise of automation and what is happening out there, I think, it's interesting this week. I don't know if everyone saw this report that's come out that in the US, where AI is being implemented, jobs are still secure and people are still employed. Whereas in the UK right now, but we're not doing that. We're just getting rid of numbers. We're kind of hitting that target. And that's what we're trying to do, saying AI has become the de facto cost cutting tool. But the reality on the ground is very different, isn't it? Because complexity, going up that ladder from respond to resolve to relationship, it means more complexity, longer calls. I'm dealing with 2 or 3 things at the same time, and I'm probably dealing with things outside of my comfort zone. So actually, at the same time, I'm also dealing with a probably pretty irate customer that's trying to resolve this as well, right? So all of that coming together means that we've really got to reshape what some of our people are doing out there at the front line. And in some ways, flip it on its head, right? Turn it around and say, absolutely, very simply, let's get our people understanding and dealing, retraining, re-educating, reskilling to deal with real complexity, to deal with people as if they are vulnerable customers, because that's absolutely what's happening out there. And sometimes, even as a consumer, you can feel the process has made you vulnerable, rather than what you initially phoned up for or emailed about.
Talk us through the super agent, because I'm really fascinated by that that title there, and what does that mean, and what challenges and pressures does that put on organizations?
So what we've now stepped into is the emergence of the super agent 2.0, and this is a new role for people. And it means that we have to take our existing people and take the old skills that they had and say, right, what do we need for them to be really skilled at in today's world? Let's take something, very simple. I'm going to use a very simple analogy here, which is, we do a lot of talk about empathy, and that's been something that we've talked about for years. But is empathy really still relevant? Ah, gosh, that's a contentious thing to say when I can see everyone's got slide decks and everything full of the word empathy and it's written emblazoned everywhere. But is it? Is it really? Is it?
Yeah.
This super agent is no longer about being, I can understand that, I can really appreciate how you're feeling.
Yeah.
No,
We've been through that training, yeah.
I'm walking in my customer's shoes and I'm really getting it. Those days are over, right? They're finished. They were kind of the beginning of the noughties even right now. Where we're at right now is I own you, I fix your problem, you can trust me, and through that you can trust my organization and you can stay with me. So I'm going to do that and I'm going to do it really well for you. So that's a real shift in competency, in confidence and abilities of our frontline teams. And they, in order to do that, they have to be really well supported by their team manager, who's not sitting there saying, right, I want you to really be empathetic, and the QA team are measuring empathy and everyone else is looking at it. It's saying, right, let's move this. We're going to shift these customers because we're going to really understand, own it, drive it forward for them. And through that, we might have longer calls, but we reduce repeat work, we reduce customer frustration, and we increase customer value and loyalty. Because customers aren't leaving because customers are rude or because staff haven't got a slow system anymore. They're leaving because that ownership, real true ownership of I can fix this for you, needs to be there.
Yep, agreed. Lots of nodding heads, probably from the audience as well as from the panelists there. Ben, talk to us about practicalities and unpacking that on a specific capability level, on an individual and also a team level for us.
Well, I think what's happened is AI is sort of changing the point where the advisor is picking up the conversation. So more often than not, somebody's gone through a level of automation and chatbot-esque interactions before they are presented with the individual. So I think Natalie said you're perhaps picking up an irate customer. I know I find it incredibly frustrating when that journey is poorly managed and disjointed. So the advisor, their role isn't disappearing, it's just becoming different and more intense because they're probably getting more difficult conversations, probably getting more more customers turning up not in the greatest of headspaces, and then they've got to deal in the moment with that more complex interaction. It's a difficult position to find yourself in.
Yeah. And Nicola, have you obviously tracking the rise of the super agent and the challenges and the expectations of individuals, has that changed your talent acquisition and also talent retention approaches at Direct Line?
It has, and I think what we do now is we hire much more deliberately for things like problem solving. I do think empathy is important, and we hire for empathy and good judgment, because people aren't just following a process now. They have to navigate that ambiguity, stay calm, make the right call for the customer. So we have doubled down on building confidence, because without that, none of the skills land in the real world. I think, as I said before, sorry to disagree with you a bit there, Natalie, but I do think that emotional intelligence and empathy is key. That human judgment defines the roles, not scripts or transactions or speed. It really is about that personalisation, and that is what we look for. Strong judgment, the ability to navigate difficult, sensitive, high-risk conversations, but ultimately getting the right outcome for our customers. And talent has to bring adaptability as well, and confidence with the change, and comfort with the technology. So there's a lot that we're looking for. Diversity as well, equity and inclusion is essential. So, we need colleagues who can really navigate bias. They can identify and support vulnerable customers and challenge unfair outcomes. We're asking for a lot, to be fair.
Absolutely. And probably no wonder then, Natalie, why the Frontline probably hasn't kept up with that wish list and that expectation list. When you look at, a number of firms that you are working with and others in the sector, there's a financial cost. When I first of all looked at this slide and this statistic, I thought that was my coffee bill for the year at 16,900. But there's a real financial cost of poor frontline leadership. Talk us through the maths of this, and also the perhaps a wider impact on firms who are probably feeling this pain right now.
So if we take just some simple maths, first of all, when I extrapolate that out and I say I've got a team of 150 people, that's costing me 2.5 million a year. I'm going to say that again. That's costing me 2.5 million a year for 150 people, which is not an insignificant amount that we can make a shift on. And that number comes from two angles. It's a performance swing. The first side is the cost of it, and the second side is the value that's lost. Okay, so cost involves things such as productivity, performance, and those traditional, what I would call attrition matrix. Okay, the value side is around customer loyalty, customer experience, staff retention, lack of replacement. Deloitte has told us for years now that it costs £250,000 to replace a good manager. Right? That number means something at team leader level as well. There's a high cost involved in this decision making that by not managing what we're doing better. So if we can manage it better and understand what it will take, what does good really look like for our organizations now, and bring that in, that's the type of bottom line benefit an organization can have in a relatively short space of time. And go back to what we were just saying about AI failures. Where's AI failing? It's failing at the front line, right? So therefore, we can also have a huge impact because there's a lot of budget involved in AI failure, and I haven't calculated that into those numbers. But if you look at what we can do to change it, there's a number of things we can do. And that's about, we've just talked about it just now, bringing CX and EX together so that we actually line up our people around our customers, ask ourselves 3 key questions. What am I doing to be a customer-centric organization? How am I bringing the customer into the room for every frontline employee? Secondly, am I aligning our real purpose for being here with how my teams are measured, right? Because what we measure is what we do, right? How do I make that happen? And thirdly, have I got the operational or leadership cadence, the systems, the rhythms, the structure, how we work to support so that I can put in place what great looks like? Because if I can get what great looks like replicated across my whole teams, that number just multiplies in a positive way.
And if you don't get that architecture, Ben, that Natalie has described there are cost implications and consequences on the front line. Talk us through what that means and what you're seeing with firms who, quote unquote, don't get it.
But I think Natalie's touched on one key one. Attrition is certainly a challenge, and the costs associated to that. I think one of the challenges is a lot of the data and insight that organisations use as well is often seen as lagging indicators. So quality assurance is after the fact. A lot of the KPIs are again after the fact. And it's almost, how can firms find some of those leading indicators to understand employee satisfaction? How confident are they in their role? How competent are they in their position as well? Because having visibility of that kind of gives you the data and the insights to make some better informed decisions, and arguably lean on your team leaders and your managers to help people in the areas that they clearly need help with. Rather than being focused on more, like on the slide, some of more of those reactive coaching on an ad hoc basis and the inconsistencies around it. I think the consistency point is just something that weaves throughout this whole conversation, but work out what you need to do and be consistent with it, because your people will thank you for it.
Yeah, and if there's a danger of, isn't there, if we don't get the inconsistency, because people, Nicola, react and respond to digital transformation, AI transformation differently, don't they? And you've identified in Direct Line 3 different cohorts of individuals. Talk us through what you've seen, because they're both the 3 groups are reacting, responding slightly differently, which perhaps perhaps challenges what probably addresses what Natalie has said, why transformation doesn't work.
Yeah, I do. I think it's really important to remember that our colleagues aren't one homogenous group, which is why our coaching approach has to be personalised, because what we actually see are three very different cohorts. The first cohort that we have is what I would describe as the pro AI group. They're really confident, they're curious and excited to try the new tools, and they'll jump straight in and often help others see what's possible. And then we have the colleagues who I see who feel a bit unsure or anxious. It's not that they're resistant, they're just worried about getting things wrong, or they're unsure about what digital change means for them. And for this group, the barrier is usually confidence rather than capability. They just need reassurance, clear explanations, and a bit of support. And then the third group are what I call the curious experimenters. They will try new things once they understand the value, and they really respond well to simple guidance and good examples. And they make up the biggest, most movable group, because once they see how a tool like AI can help them day to day, they really get behind it. And in fact, it's the same pattern that we see with our customers. Some customers just love self-service, and some will avoid it completely, but most sit somewhere in the middle, I would say. They're willing, but they just need help. And a good example is probably when a customer phones to pay a bill. We could just take the payment and move on. But I think the real value is in showing them how to do it online next time, because then it removes that fear, it builds the confidence and makes digital feel easy. I think what I would say is that it's all about making those human moments better.
Yeah. I think that can only be wrapped around if you have, Ben, the appropriate communication, the engagement, and also culture. I mean, Natalie, you alluded to it there. The leader sets the tone from the top there, but culture and communication, Ben, are critical for those individuals like Natalie's described, the early adopters and perhaps some of those Luddites, to take them on that journey in that personalized journey. And that's what Nicola was saying, isn't it? It's not a homogenous journey, it's a personalized journey.
100%. And communication is just absolutely key, helping people understand what this is here for, what does it mean for me in my role, how do I utilize this, and what's the benefit of us all doing it. So people naturally look at what's in it for me. So I think if you can articulate that clearly, and perhaps, Nicola, you've actually just made me think that you almost have to articulate that message three different ways to each of those types of people, to really get them on board. But I think if you can communicate effectively the value that this is going to create for everybody, it quickly becomes something that will be more easily embraced. And then as they start to realize that value, actually reinforcing that along the way. So the communication piece shouldn't just be a once and done activity. You should revisit it. You should talk about the successes, talk about the failures, the areas where you can make some improvements, and it just helps build that trust and confidence in people, and they're part of the journey.
Just an interesting point to add. Sorry, Nicola. Just an interesting point to add to that. To communicate at one point clearly, you have to communicate it 9 times. And Ben, you're spot on. You have to do it 3 different ways, right? But also each way has to be done 3 times. That's the point. So literally you've got to repeat it, repeat it, repeat it.
Yeah.
You might do it in a slightly different way, but you've got to have your one clear crystal point in each and every communication. So.
And that's it. It's what our business is based on, repetition. It's the simplest way of helping somebody remember key messages. Yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree.
That's a nice segue. So we've talked about the challenges, but also about, I started off this webinar by building up the fact that we want to make it practical and relevant in terms of like lots of opportunities, lots of how-tos there. And Natalie, how do leaders create this symbiotic engagement between CX and EX where 2 becomes 1? I've just realized that's a Spice Girls song. Sorry. So I apologize for that. So yeah, how does CX and EX pivot there?
For me, there's one moment of truth that happens every single day. And that's the moment that can be created, or in many organizations is created, but isn't necessarily in the right way, I would say. And that's through that moment when the team manager is with the team. And it's the huddle. It's that moment when they come together. And we know from studying high performing organizations, because this is what this is about. CX and EX is about creating a high performing organization through supporting culture, supporting performance, and also leadership infrastructure. So if we can get the huddle right for the right length of time, day in, day out, a little bit like religion, same time, same place, every single day. And the highest performing organizations do it twice a day, not just once a day. That's where we bring EX and CX together. And what we do is we line up our people around our customers, not around our internal processes, our internal trainings, and all of the gubbins that every organization has. I've worked with over 100 organizations and implemented huddles in a significant number of them. And the difference it makes around building confidence, growing employees, growing capabilities is significant. And the word that we've used throughout this is consistency. And the discipline, what do they say? Discipline beats motivation any day of the week, right? So consistency is about discipline. So putting the discipline in place and having a vehicle for team managers to make that pivot is the crucial moment. And that day in, day out is through the huddle. I was with a group recently, about 40 or 50 managers, and we were talking about how long is a huddle. And the consensus around the room, generally speaking, was a huddle was between 30 and 45 minutes. At which point I fell off my chair, because for me, a huddle is no longer, top max is 15 minutes, right? Best case, it's less than 10. So it's a good interaction where we build together our employees around our customers. And I just want to come back on one thing that was mentioned earlier that I feel as if I just need to come back on, which is the word empathy, Nicola. We talked about it briefly there. And I think that what I would replace the word empathy with, and I think is key in a huddle, is the word respect. And that's respect for customers, respect for managers and leaders, but respect for employees as well. And I think that's the key piece now. It's how do we respect? How do we show our employees every day that we really respect what they do, so they in turn will respect our customers? And that's what it's about. Thank you.
And how does huddle shake down in direct lines experience, Nicola? And do you adopt that model? And is it working? And if so, what are the results, or the performance results from the results that you've got from things like huddles? Do you call them huddles, by the way?
Different names, but yeah, I think huddles is probably the generic name. Buzzers and yeah, different names, but the same thing. And I absolutely concur with everything that Natalie just said about the importance of huddles. And yes, we absolutely do have them at Direct Line. And I think that they're an integral part of communication in our organisation. It's something that we prioritise. I'm certainly a guardian of it. So if there's any kind of pressure, maybe from resource planning, to reduce them, absolutely not on my watch, because I absolutely see the value. And we'll protect that at all costs. I don't want to kind of repeat what Natalie said, but yeah, that opportunity to get together as a team, to communicate, to understand, and to engage is absolutely vital.
I'm interested about this. I wanted just to unpack this, if I may, between all three of you. Is that a psychologically safe space, the huddle, for challenge to also happen from the front line as well? Ben?
Yeah. I'll open that. I do daily huddles with our team. Each morning we get together, we talk about what's going on that day, we talk about successes from the previous day. We often challenge one another during that huddle, because it's repetitive in a positive way. It's a consistent space. People, I think, feel comfortable to raise concerns and challenge and have things dealt with ultimately. So for me, it's however you describe it, it's an opportunity for a group of people who work very closely together frequently to engage without the pressures of the rest of their daily activities getting in the way. So the ability to challenge within them, personally, well, perhaps members of my team are listening to this, I don't know, but I think it's a positive place to challenge.
Yeah. and and I guess it forms part of that culture that you're willing to take feedback and as well as feed forward, Natalie, there. But again, I go back to this cultural argument. You've got to be able to have the right culture for those to be conducted appropriately and to get the right results from that.
So let's make a difference. Let's make a real clear distinction here. A huddle is not a meeting. Okay? A huddle is not a one-to-one, and a huddle is not a problem-solving discussion group. Okay? Because that, as soon as you go into that territory, you're in a meeting. So a huddle is a way of engaging your people, setting direction for the day, and getting your people lined up around your customer, and fundamentally driving performance. Okay?
Gotcha.
So,
Nice.
and in order to run those huddles, that's why for me, a huddle can take 5 minutes, because I'm not having discussion in my huddles. Because as soon as I invite discussion, what happens? I get the person in the room that will kind of just nod a lot, right? I'll get the person in the room that will then not discuss it in the room, but discuss it afterwards. But always every team's got an assassin, haven't they? They've got the problem solver that likes to raise the problem of the day, right? So we end up having a conversation that isn't necessarily me motivating, inspiring, and setting my team up for the day. I end up having this constant dialogue of a meeting, of a problem solving, and heading down. Well, one of the worst questions to start a huddle with is, how are you today? Right? That's the worst opening to a meeting, isn't it? It's kind of, because as soon as someone goes, well, we do the British thing, don't we? The weather was really bad, the traffic, gosh, the cat got run over, the dog did this, it goes on. So how we manage our huddles, how we engage our people, get that two-way but without going into that territory, are really key critical skills. But once you master it, then you're mastering your huddles and making them a vehicle for transformation. And that's the key difference. So hopefully I've answered your question there, Philip.
No. Good. I mean, I know, Ben, you want to come in though.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm on the tip of my chair. What's the best way of opening a huddle then, Natalie? Out of curiosity.
With an energizer.
And an example of an energizer?
An example. So we've got two sides of our brain, haven't we? We've got the left and the right side. The left looks after logic. The right looks after creativity, right? So in order to get people working in the right way at the beginning of the day, we need to get people creative in terms of their communication. So we might do a whole variety of different things. It's only going to last 30 seconds a minute, right? I had a huge experience of these over COVID. I brought together what we called mojos, right? So we did a whole series of mojos out to a whole number of different contact centers and their people every single day, where we would literally energize the team, get them working in the right way, thinking about the customer. And just doing some different stuff. We've got, I think in our average contact center, we've got 18 moments of truth that happen every single day, right? So I can bring those 18 moments into every single huddle because they create for me an agenda to do it. And it might be as simple as, I guess Ben, we've all got birthdays, right? So I've got a team of 15 people. I've definitely got a birthday at least once every 4 weeks, probably twice a month. So how do I bring that in, right? We've got to think about that, because the thing that we haven't discussed so far at all at the moment, but we could get onto quite easily, is most of my huddles are hybrid, right? So I've got people working in the office and I've got people working at home. And as a manager, I need to do them at the same time and bring them together. But come on my masterclass. I'll give you a place on the masterclass, Ben. We'll have fun. It's a day's masterclass. I'm not going to do a plug, but there you go. For all the hints and tips that you like.
Well, I think that it's I'll be quite interested in the audience. Post in the chat if you would. Just put a Y in the chat if you do huddles the way that Natalie is suggesting or indicating. So smash a Y in the chat if you do huddles that way, or whether it bleeds into a meeting. And if that's the case, put an N for no. I'll be just interested. Let's do a straw poll of who does huddles and who does meetings. Maybe that'll be the follow-on webinar to this, huddles versus meetings. There. I mean, Ben, when you look at the moments of truth and the cadence, and Natalie talked about cadence and consistency. Again, that word keeps on coming up time and time again. There is a danger that it could get broken though, and that rhythm is disrupted because we don't do those moments of magic internally with our own people, and therefore that has consequences externally with our clients. How does technology basically bridge that gap so that we don't have this disconnect?
So I think tools like Clever Nelly are there to do sort of in the flow, in the moment reinforcement of key messages and key topics that are prevalent for the individual to be confident working within, competent around. So it shouldn't be replacing leadership, but it should be there as a supporting cadence to what exists in the dialogue with the manager. So little, often short interactions around key messages. I think that's what Natalie is touching on in terms of the huddle itself, but almost using technology to help facilitate that, not in the absence, but in addition to those activities as well.
How do you lead this, Nicola? I mean, from a I'm sure that leadership of contact center leadership has changed over the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, that must be serious pressure, serious impact, serious consequences there. How has your leadership training and self-leadership, as well as actually group leadership, changed as a result of these changes that Ben and Natalie have described?
I think being a leader hasn't changed in terms of what I consider to be the fundamental aspects of being a leader, to inspire, to motivate, develop, create a vision, help people to understand their role to play in that vision. But I think what's really important, and one of the biggest behaviours that I expect from leaders, is consistency. So when leaders show up in the same way every day, steady, supportive, clear, people, they feel safe to use their judgment. But the second point is visibility. When colleagues can actually see and feel their leader in the operation, I feel that confidence goes up and escalations go down. And I think another point is how we respond under pressure. If leaders can stay calm, fair, constructive, it just sets the tone. I think that frontline teams can handle all of the complexity that we've spoken about, but what they can't handle is unpredictability from their leader.
Yep. Nicola, sorry, Philip. I totally agree with what you're saying. That's the key to it all, isn't it? That consistency, having in place a strong, consistent structure. People know what's around them. They know the protocols. They know how to do it really well. And then the team can thrive. They're no longer surviving, to coin that phrase, right? They're thriving. That's the big difference.
Natalie, in our briefing meeting, you gave me, which was one of those kind of mic drop moments where you said, was it, and forgive me if I'm paraphrasing incorrectly here, but you said that something around prepare for your worst scenario, or was that, do you remember that?
I think we touched on it slightly earlier. It's just saying now going forward, it's think about training your people, educating your team managers to cope with the worst scenario every day.
Yeah.
So they no longer are firefighting the worst scenario, because that's what's happening out there right now. People are living in chaos and firefighting. We've got to stop that. Just cast your mind back a little bit. Think about hybrid working. Over 80% of contact centers do hybrid working. And actually, they're doing exactly the same model they went into on the day of COVID, right? We know now that there are 20 models of hybrid working, right? But no one's changed their model to address how we've got to work. We've got to stop firefighting, get in place really strong structures that support best practice, support consistency, help managers do it through great technology, and then our teams can fly. Because I think Nicola just said something really important. Our people are really capable. We've appointed them. We've gone through huge recruitment processes. They are capable human beings. Our managers are really capable. Our jobs as leaders is to enable that and to help them to fly. So what do? We have to put in place the right structure so they can do that in the right environment, get the structure right, then create the habit. It takes 60 days to create a habit, right? So we've got to get people habited into those structures, because wherever they've come from, they've probably been doing stuff that's slightly different, that isn't our great way of working. And then once you've got that, when you've got that in place, then you get the behaviors, and those behaviors line up. Yeah, you got it. CXEX starts to be the magic, right? We found the magic answer to it. And that's the process we have to take our people through.
And Ben, we can unlock that potential that Natalie says we can unlock that opportunity that we get through going through that hiring process to bring the best version of yourself to your work every day through the use of technology.
100%. I think we are perhaps running the risk of ignoring a core component, which is the individual advisor. Yes, they need to have the right frameworks in place and the right support mechanisms and the structure and the cadence, but they also have to truly understand what their job is and why they're here to do it. So what are the customer interactions that I'm going to come up against? How do I best deal with them? What's the optimal outcome to get for the customer? And this comes from training, it comes from experience, and it comes from developing and fostering that really high level of competence within the workforce. And then as you kind of have that supported by the right frameworks from a management and a leadership and a support perspective, I think you're creating a super agent 3.0, because you've got one who has all of the right support mechanisms and they are highly competent and they're confident in their role. And that high employee experience is going to breed excellent customer experience. Sorry, you got me on my soapbox.
No, you can't bring in new terms like a Super Agent 3.0 because we won't have any material for the next follow-on webinar. So you've got to save it. You've got to save it there.
Yeah.
Maybe you've just defined 2.0, Ben. Actually, maybe that's what you've actually fundamentally done. Yeah, because what we're saying is, organizations need to understand their best practice through technology, through how they're working, through the results they're achieving. And then blinking heck, let's just go and replicate that across all our teams. Let's make all of our teams best practice, make them all brilliant. And then everyone can really start to get back to loving what they do rather than living in a bit of chaos at the moment and drowning. So great teams, great customers. We know all the adages. We just got to make it happen on the front line.
I was struck by this because I think that when I was questioning this slide, Ben, I was asking about the shadow of the leader. And it reminded me of a Gallup survey that, how the critical importance of frontline leaders are and whether they cast a shadow of doom or opportunity. And going back to what Nicola was saying, how critically leadership hasn't changed, but yet it's changed it's had to pivot in a different environment there. Talk us through what that means and what these statistics on the right-hand side with engagement and competence and why they're critical to effective leadership.
Yeah, so everything that we do is around improving the competence of an individual employee. And we look at two key metrics when we're reviewing that. One, how knowledgeable and competent is the individual? And we do that through assessment on an ongoing basis. And then two, how engaged are they with the process that we use to enable that to happen? And we look at the correlation between a manager or a team leader and their competence levels and their engagement levels versus the rest of the team.
Yeah.
And it is really interesting because you can see some obvious trends that you would expect. A highly engaged manager has a highly engaged team. If you have a highly engaged manager and a disengaged team, that's quite interesting to go and investigate. But the ones that I really find interesting is where you've got a highly engaged team, a disengaged manager. That is just destined for complete disaster. And when you have a highly competent team and an incompetent manager, again, it's just that leads to attrition ultimately because people will walk out the door. So the leader certainly casts a shadow over their team. And if you can support your leaders to be brilliant, that's only going to create a more positive shadow across the team.
Nicola, how are you using data points like that Ben has discussed, to support agents as well as leaders there? Because that's fascinating in and of itself. There, does that give you a touch point with managers as well as individual agents to give the personalized training or coaching that you alluded to at the start of the webinar?
It does. If I think about Clever Nelly and how we've used it in our organisation, we were very thoughtful about how we landed Nelly and how we embedded it. And one of the decisions that we made that I'm really pleased when I reflect back in hindsight is that we didn't make it punitive in any way. In fact, the only thing that we measure really is engagement, but the competency although we look at it at a high level and the team leaders can see their individual people's performance, that's not the area of focus. It's all about engagement. And what we have seen is a real link between high engagement equals high competence. So I think it's very much about, yes, we use the data, but we empower people. And it's been kind of just something that people have just gotten on with. They love it. It drives friendly competition. And it isn't something that we've had to get behind like maybe other systems or processes. So I think that's something that I would say in principle, it's about empowerment, encouragement, but not really kind of trying to drive things with punitive measures, because that doesn't always work.
Yeah. Talk us through some of these figures that we've got displayed on the screen, Ben, and so to unpack those in a bit more detail, so to add some color to the stats.
I mean, we're just passionate about correlating the improved levels of competence and knowledge in a workforce against metrics that they get measured against that the business deems to be important. So that could be looking at the level of complaints coming into an organization and how can you handle those more effectively? How could you look at reducing the number of complaints if it's errors which are driving them? Most often the error is not because the system or the process is necessarily broken, but the individual has just made an innocent mistake. So we can be really focused with how we use Clever to increase the knowledge and the competence of an individual to drive tangible business metrics. I mean, there's endless cases. I'm sure, Philip, you'll direct people to the website and all kinds of things after this, but you've got to focus with the end in mind. What are we looking to achieve as an organization? What's big on the priority list this year? Perhaps it's vulnerability, perhaps it's complaints, perhaps it's efficiencies. Where does competence and the knowledge of your people play a part in relation to that? And that's where Clever can add quite a lot of value along the way.
And people love it, Ben, I think, from my experience, because they see that value. You know, they see that this is something that's there, that's constantly supporting me, and to see your own competence growing when you get your dashboard every day and you're looking at that, that's really motivational. So yeah, absolutely.
Indeed, and I think we walk into our customers' offices and you can hear the excitement and the elation as people get their questions correct, and also the frustration when they get things wrong because they're kicking themselves that they should have known that piece of information, and that just fosters a brilliant culture around learning. And then, Natalie, to your point, if the managers can then weave that into their interactions with their people on a regular basis, you're just driving that customer experience through the employee experience, people and tools combined, which I think is key. You can't rely on one, you need to rely on both.
I think ultimately there, Ben, it's all about performance, isn't it? That's
Yes.
what EX and CX is all about. It's about enabling organizations to perform and to perform better, to do better things with their people, to do better things for their customers that impacts through customer loyalty, staff retention, a better bottom line. And therefore it's about, yes, better improvements in the day-to-day, but also having that look to the future to say, this is how we're going to get there. This is how we drive performance. This is how we work around here. And if we can make CX and EX our vehicle in some ways for driving better performance, that's got to be better for, it's a win-win-win, isn't it? Win for the business, win for the employees, win for the customers, and for the leaders. 4 wins. That's not bad going.
Let me jump in there before you start answering questions from the audience, which you can post through the chat if you would do. I wanted to just make sure that you are notified of the call to action, which is on the screen there. Please indicate your interest if you want to reach out and see how Clever supports agents as well as team leaders within the contact center. Obviously, if you want to download the excellent paper from Natalie on certainly the state of frontline leadership, there, it's a great paper. It unpacks in far more detail than we've had time today the key drivers, metrics, and indicators of performance and how you can close that gap, and unpacks those issues that we've talked about in, for example, huddles as well. So I would urge you to register for that and Natalie will send you that via email. And then obviously accessing our range of blogs and papers and webinars on the contact center and performance in the contact center is well there. And whilst people populate that, if fingers and buzzers, Ben, Natalie and Nicola, a couple of questions have come in there. First of all, we've talked a lot about confidence today. What's one leadership behavior that most directly builds or destroys confidence on the front line? Nicola, what would you say to that?
I would say empowerment. That's the thing that springs to my mind. I think that where employees feel empowered, feeling able to make the right call and use their judgment, they absolutely do. But I think where that's inhibited, people can close off and, you know, leave it to someone else to make that decision. So yeah, empowerment for me.
Natalie, can I pose a second question to you, which we've had? Looking ahead 12 months, I guess 11 months, 2026, what's the biggest risk for firms or organizations that don't adapt their frontline leadership models to this new reality that you've unpacked for us today?
I think one of the shocking figures that people are probably taking away from today is that 38% of customers are looking to do business elsewhere. Yeah. And so 12 months down the line, if you are really at risk right now of losing your customers, and I think that is quite frightening for most organizations.
Wow.
And if you tried to monetize that, I would, you know, hasten to add what that would add to your take away from your bottom line. So it's about customer protection fundamentally, and I think that's what our jobs are right now about as leaders. So this is where earlier on I said CX is not just a service issue. This is a leadership issue. It hits the bottom line. It's about getting it right. It's a window that we have got to. It's not just a window of opportunity. We've got to get hold of this right now.
Yeah. Final thought from you, Ben. If boards and executives were sitting down and listening to this, wanted to know where and when they could improve frontline leadership here, what should they be paying more attention to in 2026 then?
Yeah, good question. I think customer outcomes ultimately is a core one. The progression of their employees through their careers and the progression ladder, keep a pulse on that. And we've spoken a lot about attrition, so I think I'd go to attrition again. It's a clear indicator of good or poor leadership. Take it with a pinch of salt, because I appreciate some industries are destined for higher levels of attrition than others just on the basis of the work that they do. But I think if you could get a benchmark and you can work towards that, that is a good indicator as well.
Brilliant. Very nicely summarized. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Nicola, for your time and effort and patience on this, because we are passionate about helping and supporting all organizations raise their level of CX and EX within UK PLC. So thank you very much indeed for your time, and much appreciated. Slides will be sent to you as well as a copy of the recording there, as well as reaching out to us if you want any of the information or the thought leadership papers that we've unpacked and discussed in this webinar. Thank you very much indeed. Have a great rest of the day as well. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.